Hello everyone, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host Alan Sakya. Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Allison Duettmann.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
Thank you for coming on the show.
This is the typical German handshake, like as far away as possible.
or I sometimes do the two hands. Or sometimes we do the connect. Have you seen the connect guys yet? They do this. They put their hand up like this, and they look at the other person's eyes and they go,
It's like, okay.
It's supposed to be that moment of human connectivity, that moment of understanding that we should go for peace. And this is a lot of what Allison does. She's all about existential hope. This is what, a year ago? Year and a half?
Yeah, no, well, actually it's only half a year old or something, yeah. It feels
That's
much
crazy.
Longer, yeah.
It feels like you've been working on it for much longer.
Yeah, I think, it's more like the pooling of it that was half a year ago, but I've definitely, when you think about the threads for a while and then it just takes a while to put it together,
Yeah. And Existential Hope has this, and we're going to show you guys in a little bit, this incredible database of what would you say, videos, articles.
It's readings, podcasts, videos, organizations, people, and generally just the best work. Sometimes it's just ideas that I link to someone who gave them to me in a conversation, and they're all focused on kind of like how to create the best futures for humanity. And with best, I don't mean in the sense of like a full utopia, but just how to kind of like shift that mindset again from this kind of like focus on this existential angst aspect on one of existential hope. But I'm sure once we go through it, I can explain a little bit more that it becomes clear.
The optimizing the future of humanity and having more people talking about what it should look like and what it should be like. So you're currently at Foresight Institute, but rewinding, let's go back to your journey. All right, so where were you born?
In Germany, in Hamburg.
In Hamburg.
And that seems like a couple lifetimes ago.
Yeah. And so how long did you stay there before moving from there?
I was there, I did my Abitur there, and then I moved to the UK and did philosophy, politics, economics there as an undergrad. And then I did philosophy and public policy for my master's at the LSE, and then I traveled around quite a bit and I landed here.
And so on your journey, how did you figure out that philosophy was kind of your thing, public policy?
Yeah, I think philosophy, that it kind of happened really without any input of mine. So since I can remember, I've had this really strong, let's call it dislike for death. And that was a thing that really always kept me up every single night since I can remember. And I came into philosophy about like trying to figure out trying to reconcile this dislike for death with my situation, because most of my peers didn't have that fear. Mm-hmm. And then I started reading a lot of existentialist philosophy, and a lot of absurd. Albert Camus was my favorite for a while. Nietzsche, of course, nihilism, but I kind of like got hooked on that, and that was kind of like a guide for a while. And the interesting thing is, I think that most of those readings kind of seem to still assume that death was a given, and that we should just reconcile our lives with it. We should still struggle against the absurd, and myth of Sisyphus, like the person rolling up the stone up the hill is a happy being, but it still took death as a given. And then it only wasn't until later at university where I discovered more futurist, far future philosophy and like transhumanists to some extent as well, where I kind of like switched from this position of existentialism to one of like, well, let's assume that death might not be a given, right? Let's take this as a problem that is solvable rather than something that is a given. And and so that was one stream of philosophy. But the philosophy that I kind of got most interested in intellectually, because this was more a personal pet peeve of mine, the idea of death. But then once you get into philosophy, you see that there's really just no end to this ocean, and that philosophy is kind of almost like the ocean in which everything else kind of like swims, in the sense that everything is embedded in it. And I think especially for all other topics, I got really intellectually interested in AI philosophy, especially AI safety, which is what I did my dissertation then about. But there's really just bits and pieces, but they're all part of this ocean of philosophy. It's just really a way of thinking, I think.
Yep, I like that metaphor. It's a massive ocean, and every single aspect of life has something to do with philosophy, and it's really important to tap into that and converse with the other intelligent monkeys here on the planet to try and figure out, are we going to enable biowarfare to happen? Are we going to enable nuclear war to happen? Are we going to try and teach every child about morality so that we don't kill each other? So what are the ways that we'll progress forward is something that you've been passionate about. I care about that so much too, and we on the show talk about it a lot.
Yeah, and I think like what's really interesting in that regard is I think like philosophy as a kind of like a tool set, right? And you can apply those tools to really any field. And I think most of the time, you know, those barriers between different disciplines are really just artificially construed, and it really helps. Like philosophy really helps to see that because it's just clear thinking, right? Clear thinking can be applied to any different problem, and this is how you reach good conclusions. It's not like, you know, there are different sub-methods in different fields, but I think it's just about trying to figure out how to reach, how to get down to the bottom of the truth in every field really by using good tools, by using logic and reason and free speech and argument. And I think that is what philosophy teaches you really well.
Yeah.
And while first I think all of those different subfields that I was interested in, like another one that was the kind of like part of my involvement in also like more the political sphere with philosophy and public policy, and then also working in politics for a little bit, was this aspect of creating new alternatives to the current system and creating better governance mechanisms. And you know that because I think that getting that right makes it much more likely that we get everything else right. But to me, this interest in longevity, this interest in AI, and in kind of alternative governance, kind of like projects like seasteading or other of those projects.
Yeah, that's
those,
good.
but they always kind of seem to me like unrelated until I moved to the Bay. And then suddenly I had this like epiphany of like, wait a moment, people actually care about all of those things.
Yeah.
And it was really to me, I mean, the Bay is often called a bubble, right? Because people, you know, like live in those, like live in the silos of this kind of like, you know, like kind of like more futurist, well-being focused, kind of like silo that is enabled by technology. But for me, it was really not an echo chamber, and it still isn't, because I was not ever in that kind of community before. So coming here and suddenly realizing, because I did effective altruism as well at university, but more in the sense that back then it was still a little bit more current focused, like trying to do good right now. And now that it has become a little bit more futurist with AI safety, it kind of seems like in the Bay it pulls all those strings together, right? You have this alternative society building movement of like seasteading of the blockchain ecosystem. You have people working on AI and AI safety. You have people that are really concerned about getting, about really making sure that we create well-being for future generations as well.
Yeah.
And suddenly all of the longevity too, right? It's a really big, big project here. And suddenly all of those threads were pulled together, and I was flabbergasted that people care about really the same things, and many of them.
Peter Thiel talks a lot about the whole network effect, the fact that everybody's migrating here, and when does it stop being worth the egregious amount of money to live here?
Yeah.
And for me, I don't think it'll ever stop. I love the network effect. I love the diversity of intellect. I love the interdisciplinary approaches to studying and to working together to build the future and leave it better for other generations. I don't think the echo chamber is the bubble is going to stop, and the echo chamber of all the futurist talk is going to stop. And I think that that's really important, because it almost gives us a long now view, the whole 1,000-year view. And I think that's really important, as I think a lot of people here are building that future. Going back, another thing that you said was philosophy gives you this tool set, logic, reasoning, ability to have an outstanding conversation with somebody else, one that isn't filled with bias and rage and all these other things that we see so much polarization in the world. So I love that tool set. It's like you gotta equip yourself with the belt, and then you gotta be able to take out the different tools and use them as you go. and you were talking about systems of governance. So, and that's kind of what you're doing. This is something that I really want to wander down with you, and let's maybe wander down that a bit, and then we'll open up Existential Hope and we'll look through it. Is there a golden key to how we shall move into the future?
I think this spans government, right? But I think it's a subset really of the question. And okay, so a thing that I've become really interested in recently is different ideas of utopia. So utopia is often kind of like, construed as this one perfect goal that we can march towards, and in philosophy there are different dialectics, like the Hegelian dialectic of reaching it, or should we ever even reach it because utopia might be boring or unattainable because you need some suffering. And for that, actually, Eliezer wrote a really cool piece kind of doubting that.
Can you walk us down that piece quick on the way?
Yeah, so it's also on the index, but he basically goes through a couple of reasons why utopia is not boring, and
why you don't need suffering.
Why you don't need. It's just it's more like a diversity, and he lists a bunch of like, I think, really interesting things that make a utopia worthwhile. But I think more than creating a perfect utopia, for me it is really about kind of figuring out what is the next step that we can take to leave all the good options open and not foreclose them, but while still having this motivation to reach that next step. So a couple of other theories that that recently just popped up. One is I developed this like notion of prototopia, and the reason to develop this was a Burning Man camp. So we're doing a Burning Man camp this year focused on prototopia, and the idea was really here that in the community where I live, so I live in a group house, we kind of definitely have really high ideals. We're holding ourselves to really high standards, but we're just trying to figure it out really. And so it has this like humility to it, and we're prototyping our way to utopia. And just when I recently read a Quartz article, I discovered that Kevin Kelly has a similar concept of a protopia. So probably like along the same lines. It's a little different, but there was another one that popped up, and then a third one that I heard 2 days ago, I think, was Paredotopia. And I really like that too, right? Because I really think that my own personal utopia would be a utopia in which every human can construe their own utopia. So it's not one ideal, but it leaves enough space for every human to engage in whatever is in their interest, while making it not impossible for others to do so.
And as long as it doesn't harm other people.
The Pareto principle of engaging in voluntary interaction and them leading to Pareto preferred outcomes, which makes you best off by making no one worse off, and there's no better state that could do that. I think that notion is a really powerful one.
Is that like the golden rule? Treat others the way you want to be treated?
No, it's not really that. It's more like in interactions of individuals. Pareto preferred outcomes are, for example, in game theory, outcomes where you cannot move to a better state for yourself without making someone worse off. So no one would prefer to move given that state. And I think that is an interesting one because it doesn't rely on us, having it figured out yet. Can we do it by two apples? We have two apples that are sitting there. Either I take one and you take one, or I take two, or you take two. Please don't take the two apples.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's a notion that, and I'm not saying that that we're currently doing it perfectly, but I do think that we are really just on the verge of tapping into what we might know, and given the kind of like rate of progress and of moral progress so far, we can't assume that we figured it out right now. Looking back in 100 years, we probably have figured out that treating animals the way that we do is based on speciesist biases, and not having any regard for future generations is based on kind of like a short-term bias that we have towards us. So wanting to lock our values in right now by saying, oh, this is the utopia that we should create, that's not, I think, what we should be doing. And what we should rather be doing is to create systems in which can be dynamic towards progress, and which rely on people figuring it out together as a collective.
So, but figuring it out together as a collective also requires us to make some base set principles to thrive on, like not killing each other.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
So even if everybody thrives in their own utopia or wants to live in their own space, well, if they want to manufacture weapons and sell weapons to people, and then occur from that.
I mean that's the notion of like, that you have to have a system which enables voluntary interaction amongst individuals, and there's
voluntary
interactions, yeah. And there's definitely some ways, that one might be able to make that happen. I think one way of enshrining that, and that's really talking about like specifics here, but I do believe in the notion of a universal basic income, to the extent that we should really try this out. And in a paper that Christine Peterson, Mark Miller, and I wrote, which I can link to from the index, it's already on the index, but I can link also to it in the video. Mm-hmm. We come up with this. We don't come up with a concept, but we revisit a concept that Eric Drexler has put forth in Engines of Creation, which was the book that kind of started Foresight off, and it's called Inheritance Day. So the way that you might fund UBI is basically, and this might sound a little out there, but it's basically not by trying to redistribute resources to fund UBI, because the elite in power will probably go against this. But rather than redistributing resources that are already distributed to different individuals or elites, why not just say, well, is there any resource out there that isn't distributed yet? And there is, and that's space. And so
space like land, or space like outer space?
Outer space. And so resources in space will one day be extremely valuable. And before any one corporation goes there and claims it to themselves, and which will just exacerbate the problem that we're currently already having, why not try to find a way to make it accessible to all, so that all can benefit from it?
This still requires capitalism to create the engine of the spaceship that goes and harvests the asteroid or whatever you're trying to mine for resources.
Yeah, it's
so
more.
Then that person would want to own it.
It's more about, if you could, and there's different cake cutting algorithms to do that. MIT published a paper a little while ago on a new cake cutting algorithm. If you could divide the resources in space such that every human being who's alive at a particular point in time, and maybe over 18 or 21 or whatever, on that day, which is called the Inheritance Day, gets a chunk of the resources out there in space. And since space is so vast, it would be really a lot for every individual. If they got a resource out in space, even if they can't do anything with it, they could trade with it, right? So whoever wants to do something with it can, give something back in return, right? So it wouldn't be that we each build our own spaceship and go up there, but it's really just as a means of trade, of making those more voluntary interactions possible again, right? And the main criticism that we get is like, well, but in one generation, people will have just traded away everything and it will just look like before, but now with corporations owning whatever they have kind of acquired, because they trick people into selling their share of the universe, right? Or they exploit people into selling their share. And I think, that's certainly a possibility, but you could install something like a fund, like a smart contract-based fund that only gives you a certain amount of space uses as you grow up. And this is an idea that sounds out there.
That's interesting. Cake cutting space.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah,
then giving it to every person on their 18th birthday. Yeah.
I just think that generally space will have an immense value, and we still are in this crazy position where no one has claimed it in a way that we can't do anything about it. And so I think we should really
agree about our oceans.
Yeah, but space, the resources that are in space are just so valuable that and there are enough efforts, that have popped up in the past years of people working really hard to get out there to harness those resources.
One could say the same thing about our oceans. Not as abundant as space, but there are a lot that we could take away from our oceans.
Like, you mean fish, or?
No, yeah.
Like the oceans, like, what's valuable in terms of resources?
Oh yeah, probably quite the myriad of resources on the ocean floor.
Well, I mean, I would just assume that if it's feasible to extract them, they would have been extracted, and it's not like people are not trying, right? So I just think that.
Well, how much more feasible is it to go and mine an asteroid and bring it back to Earth?
Well, I mean, are we talking about right now, or are we talking about setting the right kind of like legal framework that will guide us into a future which is beneficial for everyone? And then space is definitely on the table, right? So hopefully, I mean, hopefully it's on the table.
It is. I like the idea of leveraging space resources for UBI. It's fascinating. I've also stumbled into this that's been fueling me for a while, is that universal basic income can be funded by the data that we leave behind. So you are actually in control of your data, and you have access control to deliver it to the different locations that pay you for your data.
Yeah, I mean, then I think that's a really nice idea, but the problem, I think, is, and without wanting to go too much into the Facebook problematic, or I think to me actually the Facebook problematic is much bigger than Facebook. It's just an internet problematic right now. We've constructed a suboptimal internet, I think, and Foresight was really involved with like hypertext Xanadu in the early days, which was, I think, a much more interesting layer of the internet with backlinks. But regardless of that, I think that it would be great if people could bank on their data, but we are already banking on our data in the sense that we get free access to information, and that we get a social network called Facebook. So I think unless people are not willing to pay for access to those social networks or to access to information, they pay with their data.
Think about the money. Facebook makes so much money, I don't even know how much, a couple dozens of billions of dollars per year on advertising. That money redistributed so that the shareholders don't take the swath of that, but that people take a lot of that home. Then we might be able to get to a point where your data is actually worth something to you, and you get access to their product, and their shareholders get to take home money at the same time. Right now the biggest problem of the essence is just the corporate greed, is that I want a third boat before I want to pay 1 million people for their data.
Well, I mean, I think it's just the incentives that are so aligned in the internet, right? So the internet works on advertisement, right? This is a thing that is enshrined in the internet. It's not just Facebook, right?
I like how you said suboptimal internet.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there was a better version out there, but for idiosyncratic reasons at the time, I think it wasn't implemented, and because it's just more complex, right, or more complicated to do. But I do think that there's a vast potential to do better, and I totally agree with that. I just moved to the embassy in San Francisco, and Tristan Harris lives there too, who started, first time well spent in the Center for Humane Technology now, and I think their work is incredibly interesting, and he's very committed. And
yeah, I love their work.
Yeah, so people are waking up to it, I think, and it's an important problem to tackle for sure.
I'm happy that we got into this crazy cosmic UBI discussion, because I think there's not enough conversations about how to actually execute the processes, especially in the short term. And I know we could unpack that further, because I think that we're missing a couple pieces from that, maybe missing a couple pieces from the data UBI one. Zoltan Istvan wants to do the national land. He wants to lease out national land and pay people in California. There's a bunch of different ones, and I think that it's good. Let's pull up Existential Hope.
Okay. Yeah, because so maybe that's interesting for the viewers. Most of the things that we're discussing here, or like the reference, the talks, or whatever I reference, the readings are on the index. So if you're interested in any of the things that I mentioned, there you can find them there.
And so here we are. We're at existentialhope.com, and I love this this graphic.
Yeah, it's by
actually-
Robert McCall. It's a really great image.
I'm gonna pull it up on your Facebook quick.
It has a little bit of like a Soviet touch of Utopia, but I like it because I think it combines this, it's not just a techno-utopia, right? It has this. Yeah, there we go. That's the image. Yeah. Great. Thanks, so this is fun. Also,
Look, I'm number 69. Haha, that's so funny. Haha, number 69.
69. There you go. 9 is my favorite number, so that's interesting for me. All right.
So, nice. So this is Robert McCall. Yeah, this is beautiful. I really love it. We got some like governance here. We got a little bit of like some Soviet, looks like some Soviet European action here.
Some humans.
A bunch of humans, diverse humans, still some animals. We got some people looking like they're flying over here, which is great.
Yeah.
They have this like massive like spaceship structure, all futuristic and stuff, water fountain. We still have a star in the cosmos and planets nearby. It looks like some space stations and some, it looks like we're using nuclear fusion to power some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I think like I think it brings home like the reason for me to start the index, which was like the personal reason, of course, was I wanted to kind of do to the existential risk kind of like feeling that I had, which in my research, I'm an AI safety researcher, but I also do like cybersecurity risk research right now, and I wanted to do to this kind of like sober attitude, because in the everyday life, if you look at those risks, you almost seem to like I just doubt whether we even make it through the century, right? Like not just AI risk, but nano risk, and then like and then now nuclear weapons being back on the table again, which we thought we'd eradicated,
and propaganda through social media.
So we think it's kind of like
AI
really
passing the Turing test.
Well, yeah, it's just this more like pessimist kind of like attitude that you get to it, but also I think generally risk research is more like this neutral kind of like very rational assessment of risk, and that's what what is really important. And it's
biased,
important that it's
neutral,
unbiased, right?
yeah.
It's very important, but on the other hand, it sometimes makes you forget why you even care, and I think it kind of like it saddles the horse from the wrong way. What's the English term for this?
That's funny. Saddles the horse from the wrong way.
It puts the cart before the horse. That's the English way of saying it. The German way is a different one. So it kind of like in focusing so much on the risks, we forget why we're even doing this. And I think why we're doing this is a really motivational component, because if we make it through this bottleneck, we're in this weird bottleneck right now where we can either really lead into
or die.
a really good future, or we could really get extinct. And we're at this bottleneck right now, which I think in an unprecedented way as before. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves why we absolutely have to get this right.
Correct.
Right? Rather than just focusing on, survival would be a success. That focusing on like, if we get this right, it's not only survival that we get, but if we get this right, the future is not going to look just plain, but it could be really so much better. So
the why is to survive and to have a great future.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think survival is already, if we survive, it's very unlikely, I think, that we will have a terrible future. Because
Correct. But it's also likely that if we survive that we do have a terrible future, because there's a class-based speciation that will occur. It's actually quite likely to occur. The amount of wealth that's accumulated, that the economy grows by so much every decade now because of information technology, and then it's captured mostly by the 1%, the growth of the economy. So why would they ever want to engage or interact with the poor or middle class at all? Bill Gates can't even, he was playing a game on the Ellen DeGeneres show where he had to guess the prices of grocery store items. And he thought that a 40 pack of Tostino's pizza rolls, he thought that was $20. He thought the Tide Pods, the big box of Tide Pods, he thought that was $4. So what I'm getting at is that there's already such a huge disconnect between the ultra rich and the poor and middle class that we can't just say that if we make it through the bottleneck, everything will be great, because the likelihood that we first make it through the bottleneck, that's crucial to survive. And the second stage is, if we survive, is everybody going to flourish like we have in this beautiful example by Robert? Or is there going to be some king up in this castle up here at the top of the utopic structure that is a benevolent dictator? Or could they be a group of 20 people that are trying to progress everybody forward? Or is it going to be like none of these peasants on the hills can have the option of entering the castle?
Okay, so I think talking about that, that will get us again, I think, into a rabbit hole, but I think it's important to not forget how much progress we've made. And I think at the event where you were on Sunday, and we hosted an event on artificial general intelligence as corporations, and Mark Miller brought this, you know, like this backdrop of really how much we have progressed, like in terms of absolute poverty. And it's really important.
Pinker does too, yes.
Yeah, and it is a graph I think that Pinker uses as well.
Great.
But you know, and I think it's really, really, really important to not forget how far we've come. And
let's say we understand how far we've come.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I agree that there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that the futures are positive rather than negative, right? And that there's a lot of work that is not technocratic and techno-centered, but that has to be done on different areas. And that's why. Okay, so maybe if we get into the index here a little bit, then it might become more clear that what this vision actually entails.
Yeah.
So
I would still like to, you know, you were saying we won't go down that rabbit hole in its full, but that is something really important to discuss at some point. Let's go through this. If we have time at the end, we will. Or
I'm not trying to dodge it. I just think that it becomes clearer down here. So, for example. Okay, so the reason why I started this was really just kind of like collecting readings, organizations, podcasts, papers, books, people, and organizations that work toward beneficial futures. So that to futures that give you kind of like a hope again, rather than existential angst and terror. And it started really off with this vision part, right? I just wanted to collect like really good readings in transhumanism and cosmism, and risk and threats, and existential angst and hope. And then, but also readings in big history and big future, because I think the best way to have foresight is to really also consider the past, right? And like this historic analysis is important. But then it became much more than that, and I was thinking, well, now that we do know kind of like what are the futures that we could strive for, what are the different focus areas? And so I made a second section with, you know, like given that if we agree on this vision that we can create these futures, what are the focus areas that we need to work on? And here we have science and tech, AI and cyberspace, but we also have society and economics, right? And this is, I think, one which is really important, and which you've been bringing up over and over again, and which is like the bedrock on which everything else gets made. So it is the fundamental thing to get right. And I'll talk about like one thing that I'm doing for that in a second. But the third one is then, given that we know the focus areas, you know, here are the tools. And those are really meta tools, like philosophy and rationality, mind and meditation, like the toolkit that we discussed a little bit earlier.
From the belt.
And you know, given that we know the vision and the focus areas, which are the tools that we can apply to them. And if you click on any of those, I mean, I think the one that we used here for at the event on Sunday was the AI section, and if you click on one of those items, it links you to a Google Doc, and on that Google Doc, I combine like the best readings on risk, on AI safety, on definitions, on ethics, and the good thing is that
it's fantastic. It's a great place for people to come and learn.
I hope not only learn but also contribute, because I'm not an expert in all of those, and honestly not in either of those fields, because I've just started this, and I think like over 90% of this is still all from me. It's just me kind of like brain dumping what good readings I find, but I would really like this to be a collaborative project. So if you find this interesting, and if you happen to be a researcher that focuses on any one of those fields that were on the index, then please just go on there, click on the one that you focus on. Maybe you work in environment and energy, click on it, and then you get directed to the Google Doc, and you can make comments on suggestions of important readings in your field, and I will every once in a while sweep the website and put those comments on there.
And then it becomes a collective effort to put together this database of information of existential hope, but also of collaboration to build that future together. Yeah.
Yes, I desperately need input.
It's funny, what we're doing is very similar, because our show content goes under these categories as well. So we have a whole subsection of people on our show that talk about biotech. We have a whole subsection of people on our show that talk about blockchain.
Neat.
Yeah, so we could even put potentially our video links to our conversations into the program as well, and then as well on our website under each section of like, blockchain videos. Oh, by the way, here's Existential Hope's blockchain doc, and then boom, like, so there's a good collaboration with that, because we're both kind of building out this set of information that we think is very wise and important to discuss and to build the future, inspire people to talk about it and build it. So that's one of the reasons why I think that I've always been gravitating towards your mind and your impact, is because you have this big vision, this big picture understanding of kind of what's going on and what's important, and that's kind of what we do on the show as well, as with this multidisciplinary understanding of what is society and where is society going.
Yeah, I think where philosophy maybe comes in handy is like that you can create a good overview effect. Yeah. I do always point out that I have dangerous half knowledge in many of those topics, right? So it comes with non-specialization in any of those fields, right? Likewise. I know enough to think that this is an important thing, but I really depend on everyone out there to fill those gaps, and if you specialize in one of those fields. Yeah. And I think just quickly, to not dodge your point on the kind of societal aspect or the socioeconomic aspect of building good futures that you raised.
And that's under society and economics.
There are some readings, but one thing that we've recently, but one thing that Foresight is doing now, and I can link to that as well, is basically, I've started this, so we're doing salons once a month right now, which are open to the public and which kind of inform our thinking about which technologies to push for and which risks to research. And recently this year I've started this kind of series of salons that are on like debunking a certain type. And the reason to debunk something is because overall I want that whole series of salons to be on strengthening civilization. Yep. So that's a mouthful. So amongst that topic of strengthening civilizations, I take 1 month each to focus on a specific sub-problem in civilization. So January was on debunking rationality, so we applied like evolutionary psychology, evolutionary game theory, and other strategies to find out what are the biases that we're rationally prone to, and how do they refrain us from just being an effective individual and the goals that we want to pursue. So that was rationality. On February we had Junun on counterculture, because culture is an important thing of civilization. So we were debunking culture and counterculture with him, again using mostly tools from evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. Then we had Robin Hansen on, and he was debunking society mostly, like our hidden motives and incentives. Then recently I did one on morality, and that was kind of as a preparation for a South by Southwest workshop that I held. And the video I uploaded tomorrow if you're interested in kind of moral debunking, and maybe we can talk about that a little later. But that's like basically how do we have an unbiased approach to morality. And now with Salma Burha, who should really be on the show. He's Salma Burha.
Burha.
Yeah, I can connect you to him. He gave one of the best talks that I've seen at Effective Altruism 2 years ago, and he gave a salon at the embassy, and he's a historian, and with him I'm hoping to do a salon very soon on the broad picture of debunking civilization. And
debunking civilization,
and like the previous ones were about debunking rationality, debunking morality, debunking culture, debunking society.
Debunking meaning just better understanding.
Taking apart of why why we think about it the way that we do, and that often involves an evolutionary perspective on, or at least a historical one, on the different issue.
Definitely.
So how did this come about?
And a futuristic one too.
Yeah, and which are the incentive structures actually that led over time, over many iterations of the games that we play with each other, led to the situation that we're in right now, and what can we learn from that to create better structures, better projects going forward that take the incentive structures into account, and also the way that it has developed. Yeah, so it's a mouthful, and it's a big project, but I'm hoping by splitting it up into one salon each per month, it will become eventually tangible or more tangible.
Yeah, and then also adding that to the Existential Hope database, and maybe writing a book about it or making a documentary about it or something like that.
If I find more time, I'll do that too.
If I can tap into the space-time fabric and figure out how to warp myself some more time, then I will write a book or make a documentary, she says. That's good. I'm glad. So that was counterculture, so it's been 4 of these, and now you're on May's is next?
May is next, and there's a lot happening right now. We're planning on doing another one fairly soon. It might already be May, but since we had, what is it now, April? Are we still in April? Okay, we're still in April. I was like, but since we had the AI workshop, that kind of would count as one of the salons, but as soon as possible, really. And those things.
What about a bioethics one? Is that coming up?
Yes, it's coming up. It's actually in the planning. We are talking to, we have already partnered with IndieBio, and so there will be a salon on that one as well. But I think to me, I think this is really important, and it kind of ties in with the approach kind of to AI safety that we have at Foresight, which is kind of like a more broader perspective on AI, and I'd love to talk about that too.
I feel like we have so many ways to take this conversation.
I know. I'm just like, once I had like a conversation with Tyler Alterman, and we were like, whenever you start talking during the conversation, you kind of like suddenly like tree off, into like one direction, and it would be great to have an index and actually follow up the tree down all the way down that rabbit hole, and then come up again, and then move the conversation forward. I think it would take a while, but.
Or if we just had a big sheet of paper and then we wrote the individual keyword as we went, or if an artist could make it as you go on like a big board themselves. Some people do that with live conversations. Down the line, when we do these more massive live events, maybe we do that. Maybe we get to a point where the show's so well funded, Patreon, that we can bring somebody in-house to make animations as we go that can show the conversation tree. And so if we were to go back to a point, or maybe even if we go forward to one of the things that we need to talk about, because I think let us go to some of these things. So decentralization, why is decentralization important as we move forward into the future?
So I think that I think we've touched about this multiple times already during the conversation, but I think creating one utopia with one perfect kind of like vision has not worked historically, and might not work moving forward. So I think decentralization has become this buzzword right now, but actually if you look at the system as a whole in which we live in, I think most of how I tie it into AI safety research is like most of the safety research in AI safety kind of seems to presume that artificial intelligence will be this singleton agent, or not a single, but like this single agent that we create that will be an artificial kind of like an artificial agent that is kind of different to us in so far that it has a utility function, and that utility function is then, the question is then how do you align that utility function with our interest as civilization? And this is a problem that is really hard, right? Because first of all, you have to solve ethics for that. We have to know what it is. What are the values that we want that agent to uphold? Then we have to figure out a way of how to communicate this to an agent in a way that an agent that doesn't share our evolutionary history, apart from the fact that we made it, can actually follow suit with that. And then I think there's a cybersecurity aspect which is very, very important, and which often gets neglected. Even if we figured out, like what the morals were that we want to enshrine, and if we figured out the correct way of aligning that AI with those morals, then we'd still need to solve the architecture and make that sufficiently safe that we can expect the agent to reliably execute whatever goals we'd like it to uphold. And then, of course, given that all of those three take a really big time to solve, all those three are really difficult problems, then you have this kind of like this meta problem of like, how do you make the agents right now that are working on that problem cooperate with each other, right? There's many different kind of entities working toward AI. It's not only nation states, it's companies too. How do you make sure that those different agents cooperate in a way that then there's no race that cuts corners? So I think all of those problems are really hard problems. And as you see with the trade wars right now, right, and as you see with China's proposed AI budget, which kind of dwarfs the US budget, a race is really likely. And we have to really prevent that at all costs. And Foresight is hosting a meeting on that later this year, and hoping to tackle that. But all of those four issues are really important, and they're each subsection is so hard that it's really important to get it right. And I think what we then did at Foresight was like to kind of take a step back and think about kind of like, how do we think about intelligence from kind of these first principles. Why is it that we're worried about intelligence? Well, because intelligence is this thing that gives rise to everything else, and it's this insane multiplying factor. But we're not really worried about the artificiality so much as wanting to create by all means wanting to create an artificial being. So then let's think about intelligence and what it means. And for us, it means really problem-solving ability, and that can be by an agent, but it can also be by a system. And to us, really, civilization is the system that is best at problem solving that we currently know of. In the sense that, if you have a system that contains only like algae and fish, they solve the problems of like creating using light, right? Then if you have another problem, if you have another system that contains humans as well, they will solve a broader variety of problems. But then if you have an even larger system containing humans and Bell Labs, that will solve many more problems. But if you have civilization as a whole, this is really the biggest system that is able to solve the most problems. So we think that civilization as a thing in itself is already super intelligent. And it already serves human interest in how I described earlier towards this conversation, in the sense that it enables interactions that are Pareto preferred by the individuals, and it does that imperfectly, but over time, really, what Stephen Pink and others have pointed out, we're really on an okay path, right? It does so better and better. We create institutions that are more enabling of interactions that are more enabling of individuals reaching their interests. And that is this tropism that tends to go into the right direction. So rather than, taking a step back, rather than trying to create this new artificial entity and then trying to make it such that the utility function of that entity serves human interest, even though they're very different, why not try to enshrine in the emergent AI into the system that is already super intelligent, which is civilization, and that already serves human interests? And this is why also the series of salons on like, how do we strengthen civilization so that we can make it more likely that we can incorporate AIs and try and mesh AIs into the system.
Yeah, rather than investing our efforts into an AI on the external side of our super civilizational superintelligence and try and make it utility based on what we want it to do, maybe we should bring it right into our superintelligent problem-solving ability right away and kind of bring it in that sense. So there's a bunch of other topics that we have listed that we should talk about, but we've already been talking about them as we've been going pretty much. What are your thoughts about longevity right now?
I think that longevity, I've certainly come to better terms with longevity, in the sense that I think it's a much more solvable problem than what I used to think when I was living in Germany. I think that there's several different fallacies around longevity that when you ask people, do you want to live indefinitely, they say no, and they think that with living indefinitely we mean, like living unhealthily indefinitely. But to me, what really woke me up to this is if you would ask people, when is it bad to die in your life, right? They would usually think that it's not so bad to die as a baby because you haven't made any investments yet towards your future self. Then it gets progressively worse as you get older. It gets worse and worse to die. As a teenager, now you're at school, you're making investments toward your future, and you're enmeshed in your ecosystem around you. People value you, you value them. And then, if you make all those investments, eventually you have this life narrative, you cash out on them, you have a good job, and then it gets less and less bad to die as you get older, and as you've had your perfect life narrative, and it's this wholesome one narrational life circle. But what I agree that it gets worse to die, but I don't agree that it gets less bad to die at the end of it. I actually think that the reason why we think that it gets less bad to die at the end of it is maybe for three reasons. Maybe we don't even think that. Maybe we think that elderly people think that, but they don't actually do. My grandma told me that she doesn't. She is really scared of death, and she really loves everyone around her a lot. Secondly, if they do think that it gets less bad to die when they're old, then that's, I think, because they're frail and old, right? Because they are ill. They have the disease of aging, which we all have, but they have it at a much more advanced level. So they are just unhealthy, and no one wants to live in an unhealthy way. But if they, were to give them back like youthful vigor, then I'm certain they would want to live longer. And then the third one is that even if they say that they don't, I think that is a psychological protection mechanism. Given that they know that they're going to die and that we don't have the strategies yet to help prevent them die, I think people just shut down, right? Before that it was God and religion and the afterlife. And now it's just like, oh, it's okay, I've had my life narrative. And that is the psychological tool that they use, I think, to update their preferences downward, or their expectations of life downward, and to just expect less. Whereas I think what we should be saying is like, that's not the default, right? It doesn't have to be the end point of life. And I think once, if there's this weird, almost like, chicken and egg problem. You first have to present them with some viable solution until they will actually, really want to go for it. But I do think that there's a lot more well-being to be attained, and I am of the belief that, or of the hope really, that I will not have to die.
Yeah, I want to see how long civilization prospers and how it does. Ron, what do you think?
It's all about the 27 Club. Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, coming in, balls to the wall, live your life, don't give a fuck, and get out before you're 30.
All right. Well, then I would have 4 more years of life now.
Well, are you living your life with that zest of those superstars that left their mark and will never die, as long as we continue to listen to their music and study their life? And
I do, but I also, I'm coming out of the closet here, which is not much of a closet in San Francisco, but I'm signed up to cryonics. I'm signed up to Forever Labs. I'm doing intermittent fasting, so I am taking steps toward ensuring that I won't die. And even if I do die, which I think might be the wrong terminology, then at least it might just be a vitrified state for a while before that changes again.
Yeah, I hope that we can get to a point where we don't need to leave our consciousness for a period of time and then come back. Hopefully we can just stay through the whole thing. It's good that you're signed up for it and exploring it. What do you think about the crypto frenzy?
I think, I think so. Research-wise, we thought about the blockchain ecosystem in a sense that is relevant to cybersecurity, because one thing, where civilization really needs a boost right now, also where AI is really, really struggling, or will be struggling with, I think, is cybersecurity. And I think a really good role model to look at is the blockchain ecosystem, because while the current kind of infrastructure that we're living in is kind of based on insecurable foundations. They're not insecure, they're insecurable, right? And they've been around for a while, and it's getting worse and worse because we build more and more on top of those structures that are insecurable, those computational structures, and also the algorithm, or cyber attacks, becomes more and more sophisticated. So cybersecurity is already a huge problem. I think on Iran, 3 days ago, it showed this message, it showed US flags on Iran's websites. Cybersecurity has geopolitical consequences, and there's a lot of threats in terms of self-driving cars, drones, and maybe even I read a paper yesterday on pacemakers being a problem, because you could potentially send viruses from one to one, because the networks right now are really unsecured so that viruses can travel. So here you have a weird connection between cybersecurity and biotech. But one way how you might solve the cybersecurity issue, and Foresight has taken this really to heart, because it is neglected not only generally but also in AI safety. And Mark Miller, who's a Foresight fellow, he's really an expert on this, and he has this theory of object capabilities, which is great. There's a lot of technical papers on this if you're interested, but where I think the blockchain system is interesting to me is not so much in terms of the crypto frenzy right now, and also not so much in terms of many of the ICOs that are popping up left and right now, even though I think they are all pushing, many of them have really good intentions and they're pushing for the really right thing, right? Even though it is a frenzy. But I'm really interested in how the ecosystem as a whole, if you look back, is beneficial or not. And the ecosystem as a whole is beneficial in the way that bad projects get killed really early and visibly. So you had the attack on the DAO, that was crazy, right? And it's really great for cybersecurity, because systems that are not secure will not survive, and they will die early and visibly. Just like, the application that was built on top of Ethereum, which was the DAO, got killed early and visibly, because there's these, $1 million bug bounties that hackers have an incentive to actually attack the system. So the system is hostile enough that there's enough incentive to attack, which breeds this security aspect. So it's almost like a feature of your startup or your ICO, or the token that you create, that it's secure. So I think that's really great. And then, I think that as a meta point on the crypto frenzy, I think there are really valuable kind of almost anthropocentric anthropological observations about the system as a whole and how it interacts with the current system. And if we really were able, if that blockchain system was able to perform a genetic takeover of the current system, we would be in a much more secure state in terms of cybersecurity. And then generally, I think it's great what the Pineapple Fund and other guys are doing in terms of kind of growing into their role of being really powerful agents in this world. And I think, right now the cryptocurrency scene often gets portrayed as this hedonistic, hedonistic ecosystem that is a bunch of people pitching their ICOs to each other, high on ayahuasca or something, on a boat. But I do think that many of the early investors especially, and many people that are trying to build value, are there for the right reasons. And we're really lucky, because those are people that have a mindset that is open source, that agrees with far future technologies, that is already a that is a kind of more or less a responsible mindset that was already enmeshed in this technological ecosystem really early on. That's why they That's why they were early in cryptocurrencies. And so they are already caring about the right things, I think. So, and many of them are waking up already to the responsibility and to the role that they could play, right? Some of them, I think, still suffer from this nobility bias of like almost treating it as a win, the wealth that they created. But many of them are really growing into their role, and I would love to see more of that happening. And Foresight is accepting cryptocurrency donations. So
tell us about the involvement. Yeah,
if anyone feels inclined, please donate. We have a couple of projects on the line that we could be doing with more donations. Some in the cybersecurity space, some specific problems on AI coordination. We have longevity projects. We're starting probably a series of longevity salons soon, but longevity requires education. I would like to do more on strengthening civilization. I think that's a project that is good regardless of whether you think superintelligence is a civilization, civilization is a superintelligence or not. That's always good, right? And there's really a lot we could do. And Robin Hanson said it right, I think, by saying, well, people donate often to charity for signaling to their other peers that they can be trusted on, and this is why many of the charities are local. So it's almost a signaling, like if something ever happened to you, I would put forth the same help to you. And so many of the long-term projects do often get neglected, right? Not only because you can't put a number on them and there are longer-term issues, but also because of signaling reasons. So I think there's still a lot we could do in terms of creating long-term beneficial futures, and I think, we should really get rolling on it.
The future of civilization, all these conversations have been very important. I'm really happy that we've had them on the show today.
Yeah, me too. I think these conversations need to happen more often, and they really, really change whole belief systems, right? Like, I think thinking about AI ethics has taught me a lot about human ethics.
Yeah.
It has taught me a lot about where I think, it has taught me a lot about where we could be going. But also a lot of realisms and biases that are prevalent. And I think just thinking through technologies is almost like an anthropocentric lens that you hold onto yourself, and you do learn a lot about that too. Yeah.
Yeah. The more that we have these conversations, the more our mind gets expanded into these different areas of thought, and then all of a sudden we're talking to other people about it, and we're learning new things from them, they're learning new things from us. And remember, you get to pick what you do with your time. You open up the computer, you get to pick. Are you going to watch things that are just there to entertain you, or just very mundane things, or are you going to watch things that provoke very interesting thought about where we should go in our future? Because join the global conversation. Join at existentialhope.com, join with Foresight Institute. Let's ask you, what is something that you believe to be true that nobody else believes to be true?
Okay, here's something that might be a little. One thing is that I don't think I'll die, but that might be true. That might not be true in this system, in this ecosystem here. Other people believe that they're not going to die. I think one thing that where I thought that I might have been a little bit too radical was talking about simulation, where someone recently, fits to the topic, and they're like, well, that would be horrible, right? Learning that we're in a simulation.
Why?
And I was like, why? So learning that we're in a simulation, to me, if we knew that the simulation was relatively stable, and we can talk about that too, but then to me it would be a really great thing. I would not mind it at all. I would find it quite reconciling and like quite nice to some extent, because it would mean that it's not the burden of making the most out of this universe is not all on us. It's not about because right now it's really this existential risk, which right now we're the only ones that can create this future or not, or as far as we know. But if we knew we were in a simulation, we knew that there are other entities and beings out there that are at least sufficiently similar to our value set, even if very different, that they are complex and intelligent, and much more so than we are, and that they create making simulations and experiments, which I think is great.
Me too.
And I think it would be reconciling if we knew that this simulation wasn't shut down. So I think Nick Bostrom, in one of his earliest papers on existential risk, he writes that the biggest threat, or one of the biggest threats, would be someone plugging off the simulation, right? Unplugging the simulation, and we can pray that no one trips over the charger of the machine running the simulation. But I think I think all we can consider, whether or not we live in a simulation, is kind of like trying to live in a world where what we do matters, right? There's certain worlds there's a world in which none of what we do matters, because either we're doomed, or because none of what we do matters, because we're going to reach a good, a positive outcome anyways. But there's this third possibility of where what we do actually matters. And if we don't know what world we're living in, we should apply a wager and just pretend we live in the world
Correct.
where it matters what we do.
Correct.
And whether or not we think we might live in a simulation or not.
Or whether or not we have all of the free will or not.
Yeah.
Just do what you think is going to matter for the optimal future outcome of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every single day, wake up and do that. And the more that you do that, the better of a world we'll live in. Yeah. So what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
I think the most beautiful thing in the world is, I think, engaging in kind of dialectic conversations that, which we're doing here.
Aha!
But I really mean it. I think
Definitely.
thinking things through and thinking them through from first principles, and also with someone that has an adversarial attitude to yours.
Totally.
Is really just so insanely gratifying at the end, whether or not you reach. So, one example was
Totally.
On the AI safety, on the AI ethics
But
side.
there's got to be execution as well.
There's got to be execution. There's got to be execution.
Philosophy's so boring when you just talk.
It can't be verbal masturbation, right?
Verbal masturbation, there it is. There's our word of the day. Enough with the verbal masturbation, especially all the kids that are currently in college. They're all so annoyingly just philosophizing all the time. I'm like, become an entrepreneur, build something into the world.
Yeah, I think one where I recently changed my mind on there was in terms of AI ethics. I always thought I wouldn't mind it very much if I was transcended by a superintelligence that is much more complex and interesting and conscious than I am, and I think I still wouldn't think that would be a terrible world, but I thought that that would be something that eventually everyone might agree to. But I've become a little bit more sober on that, in the sense that I think what matters is what current existing value-giving entities value, and humans are the value-giving entities right now. So probably what matters is what they value, and whether or not I personally value, or whether or not I personally don't find it bad being superseded by a superintelligence.
Neither do I.
Other people do. So this kind of notion that eventually we'll strip ourselves from all human biases, and we'll reach the state where we realize that that we might even be bad for the planet, and that a superintelligence that is much more complex might do a better job here.
Probably will.
I wouldn't be close to the possibility, but I've become more sober in arguing for that's an option that people should consider, that they
Takes
should
a lot
be.
of work.
Yeah, and I think you have to be realistic, right? If people don't value future generations and have not a zero discount rate toward future generations, then they just don't have that discount rate. And whether or not how much you think that either a superintelligent being might be important, or whether you think that provided it is conscious, or how much you personally think future generations are important or not, which I certainly think they are, very much so.
You would hope so.
yeah, it doesn't matter if others don't think that way. You have to pick them up where they're starting, and you have to engage them in rational discussion about this, but knowing which biases, which speciesists, and which short-term biases we're prone to. So I think, yeah, realism, Steven Pinker calls it conditional realism. I like cautious realism, conditional optimism or cautious optimism, but nevertheless optimism and hope, yeah.
Optimism, cautional optimism, that is a really good, maybe, what's another one? Skeptical optimism. There's a bunch of cautious optimism. This is a good way of thinking. This is a good way to look at your news feeds and just be like, that is not real news. I have to go and look up 5 other sources to know if it's real or not. There's all the conversations about utopia. So many people are saying utopia is not real. Utopia won't happen. Utopia can't exist. What about each person having their own utopia? What would that look like with everybody? What if somebody wants to kill people in their utopia? How do we solve that problem? What does our future with AI look like? Our future with biotech? Our future with blockchain? Thank you, Ron. Thank you. And what does our future look like with all these different technologies? How do we build it together? How do we have more of these dialectic conversations that are thought-provoking, that are equanimous? Nobody's raging here. We're just chilling and talking. Allison, this has been such a pleasure to have you on the show.
It was really good. I had a really good time. Thanks.
I'm glad you did. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll hopefully do part 2 soon. We have a lot more to unpack that we didn't touch on.
I know, we're just scratching the surface.
Thank you, Ron, our producer-director. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having me. I had a really wonderful time.
Good, yeah. We'll have to do more soon. Existentialhope.com, Foresight Institute. If you guys had a good time, like, comment, subscribe. Make sure to let us know your thoughts. Share the video with other people. Join us on Patreon to help us support the project. And we'll see you guys later today with Andre Watson. Thank you. Peace.
Woo!